Good day, detectives, and welcome to the Ashveil pre-release analysis. And I'm really excited about this one. I haven't been this excited for a character since Boothill. I've always been a huge fan of like detective shows and noirs, and I'm so glad that Ashveil's going in that direction. And he looks so good, like not just aesthetics wise, but his kit as well is really good. He seems really strong and really fun to play at the same time. So in this video, we're going to investigate what he actually does, what teams are good for him, and what his Relic and Lightcone build options are as well. Ashveil is the new Lightning Hunt character, designed to be a follow-up buffer and sub DPS. But it's hard to describe him as a sub DPS, because his multipliers are high enough for him to be a main DPS, but the buffs and debuffs that he applies are actually strong enough for him to be considered a dedicated support, to the point where he directly power creeps Robin in her own role from buffs alone, even before we consider his sub DPS capabilities. But all of this will be made super clear once we look at his kit in detail, and we're going to start off with his skill. Ashveil Skill does damage to one enemy and marks them as bait, gaining 1 stack of charge. If Ashveil uses his skill on an enemy that's already marked as bait, he deals additional damage and recovers a skill point. And the last thing his skill does is actually kind of broken. It just inflicts every single enemy on the field with 40% defense reduction. So the exact wording is, while bait exists on the field, enemy defense is reduced by 40%, but bait will always exist on the field, so the enemies will always have 40% death reduction with infinite duration and no conditions. So I mentioned that he gains 1 stack of charge from using his skill, but what does charge actually do? That's explained by his talent. So Ashveil starts with 3 charges up to 5, and when the enemy marked as bait by his skill is attacked by one of your allies, Ashveil consumes 1 charge to launch a follow-up attack against that enemy. This also gives him 1 stack of Gluttony. The easiest way to think of this talent is to think of Dr. Reish's ultimate, which also triggers a follow-up attack when a marked enemy is targeted by one of your allies. This talent follow-up is Ashveil's most consistent form of damage, so making sure that you have enough charge is important, but it's also important to have allies that attack frequently enough to trigger these follow-up attacks so that you don't overcap on charge. So Ashveil's talent also mentions a stacking resource that he gets called Gluttony, and there's multiple ways that you can get Gluttony. So you can get Gluttony from triggering a follow-up attack, from killing an enemy with your follow-up attack, from using your skill, and you get 2 stacks of Gluttony for using your ultimate. But how do we actually use the Gluttony that we gain? So Gluttony is consumed by Ashveil's ultimate. Ashveil's ultimate also marks an enemy as bait whilst dealing damage to them, then immediately launches an enhanced follow-up attack to them. This is the follow-up attack that consumes Gluttony. So for every 4 stacks of Gluttony that you have, the stacks are consumed to deal an additional instance of damage. So for example, if you had 10 stacks of Gluttony, 8 stacks would be consumed to deal 2 more instances of damage, and you would have 2 stacks remaining. This enhanced follow-up attack from the ult also has one more unique feature. If it's able to kill an enemy, and you still have 4 or more stacks of Gluttony remaining, the additional damage instance from consuming the stacks will be transferred to another enemy, instead of overkilling the enemy. This effect prioritizes the enemy with the lowest HP. So for example, if you had a field full of enemies with low HP and used your ultimate with 12 stacks of Gluttony, the enhanced follow-up attack could potentially kill 3 enemies, because the additional instances of damage from consuming the stacks will target the next lowest health enemy once it's done killing its target. Now on to his Ascension passives. I've already alluded to it here and there, but Ashveil's Ascension 2 passive is quite simple. Ashveil gains 1 stack of Gluttony after using his skill, 1 stack after killing an enemy with his follow-up attack, and 2 stacks from using his ultimate. Yeah, so it's quite simple. Use your abilities and you get more damage instances on your ultimate. But I think the really cool / interesting part of this passive is that you get 1 stack of Gluttony after killing an enemy with the follow-up attack. Because this passive means that you don't have to wait until you're at max Gluttony before using before you use your ultimate, as long as you time it correctly. So for example, if you're at 7 stacks, you would usually expect to only get 1 additional instance of damage. But if your enhanced follow-up attack actually manages to kill an enemy, you gain 1 stack back, so then you'll have enough for another instance of damage. Ashveil's Ascension 4 and Ascension 6 passives are absolutely massive. It's quite literally what puts Robin in the grave. So his Ascension 4 passive gives So his Ascension 4 passive gives 80% damage bonus to follow-up attacks, and just as an additional bonus, it gives another free energy for Ashveil for every follow-up attack he launches. And his Ascension 6 passive is even crazier. What it does is that it allows his allies to deal 40% more crit damage to all enemies, regardless of what type of damage it is, and an additional 80% crit damage if it's follow-up attack damage. So just purely from a buff standpoint, he gives 40% defense reduction with no conditions, he gives 80% damage bonus to follow-up attacks, he gives 40% crit damage to all allies with no conditions, and 80% crit damage to follow-up attacks. And if we do a quick comparison to Robin, she only gives 25 crit damage to follow-up attacks, 50% damage bonus, and about 1000 and a bit attack, which is reliant on her being in her ultimate state. Ashveil just simply outdoes Robin when it comes to buffing follow-up attack units, especially in scenarios when you have additional sources of defense reduction or defense shred. It's actually like kind of insane for a hunt character with such high multipliers to be buffing so much at the same time. Like honestly, if he's supposed to be the sub DPS for some character, I'm kind of scared of what that character will be able to do if this is what Ashveil's kit is doing. So I'm just going to quickly go over Ashveil's E1 before we do a quick summary and then move on to the team section. Ashveil's E1 inflicts 24% vulnerability to enemies that are above 80% HP and 36% to enemies that are below 80% HP. Considering the other buffs in his kit, this is actually kind of broken. It literally makes him into a Harmony unit or a very high quality Nihility unit. As in, Ashveil E1 is better than Ruan Mei E1, and he actually beats Tribbie E0 as well in a lot of her teams. So if you're looking for a DPS and a support at the same time, you might as well get E1 Ashveil. So I'm going to do a quick summary of his kit as simple as possible in Razor language, but because we don't have Razor in HSR, I'll say Luca language. Use your skill and ultimate to generate charge and gluttony. Allied attacks consume 1 charge to trigger a follow-up attack. And once you gain enough gluttony, use your ultimate to deal additional instances of damage, hopefully killing an enemy so you get more gluttony. So on to Ashveil's strengths and weaknesses. His first strength is that he gives massive generic buffs to all allies with no conditions, and even bigger buffs to allies that deal follow-up attack damage. His second strength is his extremely high single target damage. His multipliers are some of the highest in the whole game, surpassing Fei Xiao by a considerable amount. Third strength is his high attack frequency, which allows him to be a really good driver for someone like Robin's damage. His biggest weakness right now is his massive energy cost. It costs 160 energy, which is the same as Argenti's big ultimate. And because his ultimate is one of his few ways of generating charge, not having enough energy means losing a lot of follow-up attacks. Leading on from this, his second weakness is that you can easily either run out of charge too quickly or generate way too much charge, where your allies literally won't be able to attack fast enough to release all of the follow-up attacks. So this will likely happen in a team with Sunday and Robin, for example, since Sunday won't be attacking and Robin won't be attacking either. His last weakness is kind of a weird one, is that he doesn't really have a strong team that really allows him to shine and use all parts of his kit. Because Ashveil is best in slot in every single follow-up attack DPS's teams, however he doesn't have a strong best in slot team for himself. I'll explain what I mean in a little bit more detail in this team section. So because Ashveil gives so much buffs, he has 2 playstyles, one as a support and sub DPS and one as a main DPS. But it's really hard to call him a sub DPS because he does so much damage. Like, he'll be doing more damage than your carry. If you're a little bit familiar with Genshin Impact's meta, it's kind of like using Mavuika as a support and spending a lot of time on field with her. Like, technically she's still a support in that team, even though she does majority of the team's damage. This is very similar to Ashveil, where just running him in his own team will just do more damage. But I still think it's really cool that he brings back old characters into the meta. But if you just want to play him as a support, he works really well with follow-up attack characters like Fei Xiao, Yun Li, Dr. Ratio, even Archer. And because he does so much damage while also buffing, he actually enables 2 new wheelchair cores, that can enable other carries that aren't specifically follow-up to actually clear. So his 2 new wheelchair cores are Ashveil Robin DHPT and Ashveil Tribbie DHPT. This follow-up attack wheelchair core should be able to carry most units in the current endgame modes, excluding Anomaly Arbitration. And for the lovers of men out there, consider that Ashveil is really strong with Jingyuan and Blade as well. So let's talk about Ashveil as a main DPS. I've done a lot of calcs on his main DPS playstyle, and some of the things might surprise you. Because Ashveil's kit already provides him with a large amount of buffs, it means he's already quite saturated in damage percent and in crit, making the supports that provide those stats a little bit less effective. And the fact that he provides defensive shred means that any supports that have defensive shred as well become way more effective with Ashveil. In a weird way, this equalizes a lot of his performance across different supports, meaning that he has a lot of different options for which supports he can use to create a good team. A main DPS Ashveil team is usually composed of 3 components. So you have your main support, whose whole job is to buff Ashveil. So this would be a character like Sunday or Sparkle. Then you have a secondary support who acts as a follow-up attack trigger. So a character like Tribbie or Cipher, who actually initiates their own attacks so that they can consume charge and allow Ashveil to perform follow-up attacks. And his last slot in most cases is a sustain, but you can also run another support for sustainless runs. So the best options that I found for the main support slot were Sunday, Sparkle, RMC, Ruan Mei E1, Robin, and a special secret support that I'm going to get onto in a bit. I think for most players, Sunday will be the most comfortable and preferable option for the main support slot. When run with DHPT, Sunday's teams are some of the highest calcing teams, along with the fact that his ultimate provides energy for Ashveil, which is absolutely massive because it gives you 2 additional follow-up attacks, which also increases your damage. However, if you're not running DHPT, or if you're in a scenario where you can generate a lot of energy, running the new buffed Sparkle will probably be your best option. In terms of pure damage output, Sparkle actually calcs higher than Sunday, and she also provides a decent amount of buffs to other allies in your team that aren't Ashveil. But the lack of energy regeneration makes Sunday seem more desirable. RMC will probably be your best in slot free-to-play option. They provide surprisingly high amount of damage to Ashveil because he already has so many buffs, so the true damage elevating it actually does a lot more. And the fact that he has 160 max energy means that you get more value out of the true damage passive. E1 Ruan Mei was a character that really shocked me with how well they actually performed. The defensive shred that you get from the E1 goes really far in this team. In fact, the teams that I calced with Ruan Mei E1 were some of the highest performing teams. And because she's available to purchase in the shop, if you just save up your currency, you can get her at E1 quite easily. And actually have a strong Ashveil team with E1 Ruan Mei, RMC, DHPT at 0 additional cost. I was a little bit disappointed in Robin's performance. I expected her to calc a little bit higher. Maybe my calcs are wrong because I usually just calc break teams. This was my first time trying a non-break team. But at E0, Robin consistently performed good. Not great, not like blow your socks off, but consistently she was in the higher end of teams, but not necessarily in the top teams. And because she can't attack when she's in her ultimate, she becomes a less valuable teammate for Ashveil. And now it's time for the secret support. I wonder if anyone was able to guess it, but it's Black Swan. Black Swan is surprisingly good with Ashveil, especially with a lower investment E0 S0 Ashveil. To my surprise, one of the best teams that, just looking at Ashveil's personal damage, in terms of just pure damage output, ignoring like energy or any other issues you could have with this team, one of the highest calcing teams was Ashveil, Black Swan, Hysolent, which is kind of crazy. Buffed Black Swan gives 72% damage bonus, 20% defensive shred, and 25 vulnerability. Because Ashveil synergizes so well with defensive shred and he's undersaturated in vulnerability, Black Swan actually performs quite well as a main support for Ashveil. Ashveil giving defensive shred means that Black Swan is going to be dealing a lot of damage on this team as well. Just to put things into perspective, E1 Black Swan was better than E1 Robin in my calculations for Ashveil. But to be honest, please don't pull Black Swan just for Ashveil. I doubt that this team is actually going to be played because they don't really have any core synergy in their kits. It's just that the defensive shred is really good and the additional buffs that she provides is good as well. So now that we've covered all the main supports that stood out to me, let's go on to the secondary support that's going to be triggering the follow-up attacks. The best two choices for this slot are Tribbie and Cipher. At E0S0, Tribbie just tends to perform better than Cipher, but if you get Cipher's S1, Cipher becomes the best in slot option in this slot. But personally, I would just choose whichever out of the two that fits the situation that I'm facing better. If you really want to play Ashveil with a follow-up unit, then the best one for his personal damage seems to be Topaz. The teams aren't top tier, but they do function and it gives you a good place to play Topaz. Mose is also a really good option and I like their team together just because they look cool together. But because most of his value comes from his E4 creative damage vulnerability, he is a little bit less effective than Topaz because Ashveil already has so much crit in his kit. Finally, onto sustains. So his best sustain is going to be DHPT, and you might as well use him because he's free. But if you need him in another team, like you're running a final team or something like this, Aventurine is actually still really good. One of Aventurine's biggest issues in the past was that Robin, who was the main support for follow-up attack teams, buffed a lot of attack, but Aventurine didn't scale on attack, so he got buffed less than everyone else on the team. But with Ashveil's release, all of Ashveil's buffs can be applied to Aventurine, which means that his damage output increases on this team. He's still not as good as DHPT though. Other options include Lingsha, Gallagher and Hua Hua on Quid Pro Quo. They're all decent options, but DHPT is just a bit better. So if you're looking for Ashveil's best in slot premium team, it's looking like it's possibly gonna be Ashveil, Sunday, Tribbie and DHPT, and this team does scale with high investment as well. So Sunday's S1 is absolutely massive for this team, Tribbie's E1 is a good damage boost, and even DHPT's E1 is really good. Obviously you can use alternative options, and I bet you that with the changes that are coming in the beta, the teams are going to change, but I will release another video going over the new team comps. So for all of the Boothill mains watching this video, I know you've been waiting for me to answer this question. Can you use Ashveil with Boothill and Rappa as well? Because why not? Let's include Rappa. And the answer is yes, because the defensive shred that he provides is huge. So you can use him as a generic debuffer on a Boothill or Rappa team. So in this case, you replace Fugue on a Boothill Rappa team, because the stat buffs that Ruan Mei provides are actually used quite well by Ashveil on these teams. So the team will be Boothill Rappa, Dahlia, Ruan Mei and Ashveil as your sustainers 4th slot. So now it's finally time for the last section of the video, which is the Lightcone section. This is going to be quick and painless, hopefully. So his signature weapon is going to be his best in slot weapon. This is mostly because he's quite starved for attack percentage, and the fact that the defensive shred from his Lightcone applies to all of his damage, including his skill and ult damage, whereas his other premium options usually only have follow-up attack bonuses. So his premium alternatives are Dr. Ratio's Lightcone, Topaz's Lightcone, and Archer's Lightcone. These premium alternatives are around 7 to 10% better than his free-to-play option. Ashveil's best free-to-play options are going to be Cruising in the Stellar Sea and the S5 Battle Pass weapon. But if you have the Battle Pass, you might as well just save the currency and get Topaz's Lightcone instead. So that should cover everything. This video was a lot longer than I expected, but let me just give my own opinion and my own thoughts about Ashveil. Obviously, I'm really excited for this character and I think he's going to be quite good, but I think we need to temper our expectations a little bit. This is only the second DPS released in 4.x, so it's likely that the damage output of future characters is just going to get higher and higher. The thing is though, Ashveil gives so many good buffs that he's going to be relevant in the future somehow. As long as they keep on releasing follow-up attack characters, Ashveil will have a role. So I think all we're waiting to see now is if he's going to turn out to be another Anaxa or another Mighty. That's basically all dependent on the HSR devs and the direction that they want to take the game in. Do I think that Ashveil will be able to compete with Mono Remembrance or Mono Elation? Not quite, but I do think that sustainless Ashveil teams will be a good alternative to people that don't want to run the flagship Remembrance and Elation teams. I think if you can really learn how to play Ashveil in those kinds of teams, he's going to be a good investment for your account as a whole. So yeah, that's all detectives. Thank you for joining me on this investigation of Ashveil's kit. And I hope that this was at least a little bit informative and I wasn't just yapping the whole time. And if you're a theory crafter, please leave me a comment, let me know what I got wrong about Ashveil in this video. I'll try my best to update the pinned comment with any corrections that I might need to add. Thank you for watching and please like and subscribe. I'm really trying to get to 1k so I can get this channel monetized, so I can afford to spend more time and effort on these videos. Thank you, bye.